Hey there, BookTube. Noah, everyone who reads and must converse is the channel. Sundays with Borges is back in action, and today I have Aaron Facer of the channel of the same name. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, all right.
Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Doing okay? Yeah,
Cool.
awake, doing
Thanks for
good.
coming by. I tell you, of the people that have talked about Borges and love Borges, what he's done, you were the only channel that I knew that was talking about Borges even before I knew how amazing Borges was, that I haven't had come over and share talking about a story with me. So thank you very much for joining what I do on Sundays on my channel.
That's very cool. It's fun to be here.
Yeah. And we picked a couple to just do it right for you. A couple of stories, the duel and the
Mm.
other duel. I picked them because I think they really complement each other, or they kind of speak to each other, or do what Borges likes to do, is look at two things from different angles, or
Yeah.
two different facets of the same thing. So I figured it'd be cool to explore. Um, what do you think about the two stories, just in title, and how that worked out with how the stories are, you know?
Mm. Yeah. Well, I think just initially, just with the titles of the story, um, just the jewel and the other jewel, which it seems like he does that a lot with things where just between the titles of stories, there's a kind of almost practical joke in them.
Right.
I think he's got yeah, I think he's got a poem somewhere just called "The Borges" that just kind of pops out of nowhere. That yeah. So, um, but yeah, with these two stories, I think for me, overall, just with them there, yeah, two stories about rivalry, two stories that um, the more I think of them, they're stories about sort of a meaninglessness, I suppose. But yeah,
I
it's
think you might be onto something with that for sure. Um,
mm,
Borges has already shown in the couple that I've talked about of the collection out of Brodie's report, that they're more hardcore than the others. But the duel, the first story we'll talk about, is
mm,
the duel. It has the title with the most expectation to it, given
mm,
what you know about Borges coming into it. He's and he gives you a story much different than you expect. It has a quality to it that is in very few short stories by Borges, where there's a female protagonist. It's females that we're following, and I was reminded of like Amazons, right, as being one
mm,
of the only ones. But there's no violence in this. There's no gaucho
mm,
lifestyle. We're like in the art world, and even like high society art
mm,
world. This woman is an Argentinian uh, that now lives in Canada, and she's just rich, decides to be an artist. And everything about this of the duel, the back and forth, is hidden. It's subtle. It's very internal, and we get that kind of feel. And when Borges is calling out these strikes back and forth in the story, it's almost like we need him to tell us that that was a strike against,
yeah.
that they're taking jabs at each other.
Mm,
It was that hidden of a duel.
mm.
Um, so what do you got to say? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I think just the subtlety of this story. He's like immediately from the first sentence here, he's riffing on like Henry James and stuff like that, and it could easily be like a Henry James story, or I don't know, it could be like Edith Wharton or someone like that as well. You know, it's so so classy and just yeah, totally
It's
different.
good. The
Mm,
kind of he said even telling this story at the end of that first paragraph is for
mm,
him a sort of an adventure
yeah.
to do it there. And
Mm,
yeah, so we're coming into them with lightness, but there's nothing light about just looking at just that aspect of these ladies' rivalry. But there's so many ways in the story that it's juxtaposed with other feelings. It says straight out that they loved one another
mm,
completely. and
mm,
that in their private duel they act with perfect loyalty to one another. So I got the sense of this kind of thing, a rivalry, not, but more of like a relationship, but that's a
mm,
little too broad. But how
yeah.
about the kind of rivalry in Pokemon, right? Where
Okay.
these
Yeah.
two people are like complete rivals, but they're actually best friends and they
Mm,
want each other to win and they help each other to win. And whoever's stronger is j- even just as respected, and the rival is respected even in his losing because we're
mm,
all learning and all this kind of thing and that kind of rivalry relationship. What do you think?
mm. No, yeah, definitely. I think there's like a bit near the end where, yeah, I think Borges says that there are no winners or losers in this relationship, and it's like this totally reciprocal thing where they're like two mirrors, kind of just constantly reflecting each other, and um, yeah, so yeah, it's more that they need the relationship and the back and forth rather than yeah, well, rather than they're trying to win or anything.
Right.
Um, yes,
Well,
yes,
and so,
mm,
speaking on that, see, I read this with Yasmin. She was instrumental in starting the Sundays with Borges. But so I
mm,
still have read Brodie's report with her, and she said when she read this story that the along with the strikes against the jabs back and forth being needing to be called out, the wins
mm,
don't look like what you would expect wins to look like in this kind of in this kind of duel, the kind of hidden female duel. The wins are look different, and I thought that really interesting. And
mm,
where's the wins and what Borges is doing? There's a couple of big wins, one for each of the women at the end of the story.
mm,
One becomes very recognized and gets an award, and was distinguished, lovable, of impeccable morality, gave a party to celebrate, and the other woman even paid for it,
yeah.
that kind of thing, and then turns around and gets a little vain because of it, and it's just such little one-liners where Borges has given it to us, and then the other woman gains a post, some ambassadorship to, or something like that. I do have her
Yeah,
mark.
like a cross-cultural thing. Yeah.
And like she wanted it or something in
Mm,
Catalan, and so it was like it just kept going back and forth. Um,
mm,
but I didn't see a lot of winning happening, except for they were both successful and both really
yeah.
just enjoying their life,
Mm,
right? I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah. It's kind of like I think there are a few bits where like the word like painting is like capital P, like it's just kind of like this force that's transformed both their lives, and all that matters is to keep going.
Yeah,
And in a way, the relationship is what keeps this going, and kind of
right,
keeps their calling kind of alive
right.
for them.
True.
Yeah, at least I felt that. But
And then at the end, yeah, I mean, it's like that the psychological rivalry, the subtle kind of thing between these two women is the reason and meaning behind
mm,
what they're doing, because one passes and the other, it is illustrated that she kind of loses her meaning, and that's unlike Borges there to give any kind of reason or meaning for the things that are
mm,
in his stories, right?
yeah, yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
But he wants
Mm,
to explore that, so I thought that was very interesting that he really did use this story to show, or that duel to show that people, I guess, kind of derive their own meaning and um and value, of their life or experience, and they
mm,
do that through violence or through rivalries, conflict, even
mm.
of subtle nature, all the time. That's where the values place. So that's where you know.
Yeah, it's a very relatable like thing. Like it got me thinking of like my own like childhood, and even with my best friend, we're still really competitive and trying to run faster than the other, and everything. And it's yeah, it's just like such a part of us in our culture to try and one up each other as much as we can, even if
Right.
it's really subtle and backhanded. So like, yeah, I think both these stories really tap into that feeling, um,
Yeah.
and then it's just the context that kind of
It's
yeah
cool.
gets, yeah
So when I first read this first story, The Duel, I was kind of put off because I said this is totally not what I expected from Borges, a high society cultured uh art world story,
mm,
but it was interesting, and then I got done. And then you read The Other Duel. And then we go to The Other Duel, and we're much more familiar territory with Borges, right?
yeah
The Gauchos of Argentina. And so immediately it's like it's not a compare, but it might be a compare and contrast, but it's more
mm,
contrasting
yeah
the first story just right off
mm,
the jump, right?
yeah definitely
um
mm,
so is there we can start with The Other Duel just with the
yeah
first lines, just like the other one, because he
mm,
comes out there saying that he's talking about this general.
mm,
um the person that they're talking about is they're telling the story of he's going to tell the story of a practical joke
yeah
that he played.
mm,
And what comes through to me was way it took me a while to get to the place of a practical joke in any kind of way. I got there completely on a second read, on another read through.
yeah
But we have two males in this one, male protagonists that have a rivalry where they just don't like each other. They just have, they just kind of have a thing for each other. They don't like each other.
mm,
Maybe one's jealous of another, but it's back and forth, like through multiple points in their life or whatever. And you want to say something before we get any
yeah
deeper?
I suppose this one is much more like visible, and like they become like famous in their town for being for just hating each other, and like everyone has to break them up in case they start a fight and stuff,
Right.
or at least at one point. So yeah, it's much more obvious than the other story, and
Yeah, and so it's like a passionate thing, but it only comes through at some points. It has that point where the story says that they cross each other every day. Their paths cross every day.
mm,
So there's ample time for them to fight or
yeah,
do what they would want to do.
mm,
They kind of accept each other. There's a camaraderie in that, maybe.
mm,
It's not really spelled out, but they are both soldiers. And then they decide to become gauchos, saying, well, the life of a gaucho is not any harder than the life of a soldier. They're just
yeah,
really go with the flow kind of people, right?
mm,
I mean, hard, life hard people.
mm. Yeah. I think the yeah, it's just like earthier and more real, and I think that's kind of like reflected in like just how Borges is telling the story as well. Like with
Yeah,
the first story, he keeps like interrupting himself, saying, "Oh, this phrase might be a bit cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway." Whereas this one, he just says it as it is, and he doesn't really interrupt himself too much. He just kind of keeps going,
right.
and yeah, it's much more
A lot more
yeah,
straightforward
mm,
storytelling in this Brodie's report. I think it's a testament to what he was trying to go for with that. But the story
mm,
did it just flows there. The Other Duel,
yeah,
where they join these gauchos, and then they get he gets a little political in this one,
yeah,
and it's later in his life, and it's when he's is making more political statement, and had some commentary, I guess, with this kind of thing a bit. And they get captured. They're all gonna die. They're just like
mm,
being held and detained. And the the rivalry between these two guys is kind of a legendary, like a topic of gossip. Everybody's into it.
yeah,
They're into it. They feed it. People feed it. So
mm,
we all know these kind of things, right? Something that becomes an identifier for a person or even a couple, friends or in their relationship, and then they have to, or even they feed into acting in a certain kind of way that may or may not be natural all the time, or something like this, because
mm,
it's an identifier, and then it just feeds itself for something. So this rivalry might have something like this. There's something like a little more primal with this kind of
yeah,
rivalry, I would say, but maybe that's the more masculine way of
mm,
approaching this, that of course, I don't relate to the other one as much, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I think this one like reminded me of it got me thinking of like Gimli and Legolas in Lord of the Rings, and like the
Right.
way they're like, when they're doing the body counts and stuff in all the battles. And yeah, it felt like a more hostile version of that.
Right.
Yeah.
It goes crazy in a way.
Mm,
So when it comes down to it, I expected, what I expected from the first story is more than delivered in the second, as far as
mm,
violence and this kind of thing with how the duel ends up. But it ends up being an instrument of this character that is the one that plays the practical joke. So these
yeah.
guys are going to race each other to finally see who's the better. We'll give them one last, kind of thing they can compete about or with.
Mm,
But first, we're going to slash both their throats at the same time. Whoever
mm,
gets the furthest wins, and it's just completely absurd, crazy, and how it plays out is very gruesome
mm,
and leaves you in a place of very ironic thinking. Is this Does it even matter? Do things even matter?
yeah.
Um, just the darkest humor, pitch
Mm,
black, dark
yeah.
humor.
Mm, yeah. And like it turns out that in a way, yeah, it's not even a competition of who's best, because how it turns out is just to do with the people slitting their throats and how good a job one guy does and how bad a job the other guy does. So it's really got nothing to do with them at all, and like
Yeah,
neither of them's better than the other.
right.
Yeah.
And just because they're these two guys,
Mm,
there's a couple of soldiers onlooking that we get a piece of their conversation
mm,
and says, what's the use in this or something, and the other guy says something about them being distinguished by being able to, by having this competition. We're
mm,
all going to get our throats cut at the same time, but
yeah.
these two guys get to race. So whether
Mm,
they knew him or not, but yeah, does it matter? And then what is this, really about? So then,
mm,
uh how fair is it to compare, and how much do we want to flex, pushing that these two stories were meant to be related to each other and compared to each other
mm,
in the
mm,
elements of the duels between the characters.
mm,
I think it's really interesting, and Borges does a good job later in his life of really digging into mental states in just the storytelling modes.
mm.
What do you
Yeah.
think?
No, yeah, definitely. I found that I was getting more out of the first story reading it after having read the other duel.
Nice.
Um, so it, um, so yeah, I found just more depth, and I sort of picking up more on the wins and the losses with these two women after having read about these two gauchos, which is quite cool. Um, but yeah, I think that, and then seeing the way the relationship between the two women kind of works. Um, yes, seeing that then also gets you thinking about these two guys. 'Cause in a way, that kind of dependence is
Yeah,
maybe the thing that for me links the two stories the most, and how um, yeah,
definitely.
they
Uh,
need this rivalry to keep going.
I
Um,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to see that, even though in the first one I feel like it's more overt that their necessity for each other.
Mm,
But um she gave up, she didn't get married
mm,
because she wanted to continue with the rivalry, and it's like in in the first story the rivalry is more is it just it's red hot,
mm,
but it's so hidden and covert. And then in the second story it's just kind of bubbling right up under the surface, and
yeah.
sometimes it breaks through,
Mm,
but it's more in a violent, destructive mode.
yeah.
Whereas the first story, the jabs and the things kind of are boons in themselves too. They're
Mm,
not, it's not a destructive thing. They're both, through the rivalry, push each other better and better
Mm.
throughout their life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Borges
cool.
does so much. It's awesome that we can just go through it. And yeah, Borges does so much with short stories.
Mm. Yeah.
Have you read much more out of Brodie's report?
Not too much. No, just just really a little bit before these, and then like the forward, just to get like a just get a taste.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. Mm.
Very
Uh,
cool.
mm.
You got anything else on these short stories at all then?
I think, yeah, there are like two kinds of meaninglessness
Yeah.
that I got out of each of them. Um, yeah, I don't know if it's really obvious or not, but like the first one is,
In the second one for sure.
mm, yeah. So yeah, the second one is like a yeah, even the duel itself is meaningless.
Right. Yeah, it
You know,
becomes this like cartoonish
yeah,
idiot
mm,
game just to play with life and death there at the end. And
yeah, and like one of them wins, but you can never know it because
but
he's dead.
even in that first story, I was thinking when I
Mm,
said that Borges is giving meaning to calling out that these women in the
mm,
story gave meaning to their own lives through each other. That
yeah,
by that, I guess it does imply maybe that everything is meaningless unless we give it meaning ourselves. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and
I
like
think so. Yeah, you need
kind
to
of go in there.
find. Yeah, I think so. And then for then like the woman who's left behind in the first story, then she has no meaning because what she's been giving her meaning her whole life is now gone. And the
Right.
last painting she ever does is of her, the other woman who's now dead. So um, yeah, is that without the other, then without the something to compare to,
Right.
then, yeah,
Oh, that's very cool.
mm,
And I was just thinking, I thought very quickly. I didn't really go, down a table of contents to look at stories or anything yet. But
mm,
Borges is one of the beautiful things about a lot of Borges stuff is that he can postulate so much without telling you what it means or giving
mm,
it meaning or value, and
yeah,
then just letting you free in that
mm,
place. Um, so it's hard to it's cool to see him play with it like that,
mm,
and I would be interested to know to go back and look at some of that kind of stuff.
mm,
His strong short stories, like really storytelling short stories like Amazoons,
mm,
that kind of stuff. Definitely reading Brodie's report harkens back to that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think I was expecting something more like more like the South. I think with these
Yeah,
stories,
yeah,
and then
I
and
love that.
then
I love that
yeah,
story.
yeah, that's one of my favorites. And yet both of them just go in totally different directions. Like one is so much more than the South, and the other one's so much more laid back. It's
Right. So
yeah,
yeah, there's that another thing I wanted to touch on a little bit that I touched on a little bit but didn't with the second one say
mm,
how like your expectations for the second one I said you're kind of in a comfortable area, you're right in the pocket, but then it ends up being even more brutal and horrifying,
mm,
psychologically, or you know in a questioning what does it all mean kind of way.
mm,
It ends up being even more hardcore than what you would expect. So it just
yeah,
blows it out of the park. So with the first story, he plays it real soft
mm,
and kind of subverts your expectations. And with the second one, he just gives you you're just like, whoa, okay, I got you, Borges. It's bleak. Okay, I get
yeah.
it.
No, yeah. I think they are just because the contrast is so massive. They're a perfect pair because of that. It's like yeah, it's like a crazy perfect story in two parts.
Yep, and it can be read very easily in one sitting. Both
Mm,
stories, for one story is 5.5 pages, maybe.
yeah,
The other one is 4 pages,
yeah,
so less than 10 pages, and you got two Borges short stories that'll keep you thinking for a day or three.
yeah, definitely. Mm,
Very cool, Aaron. Thank you for
mm.
coming by.
It's okay. It's okay.
Sundays with Borges. It's on. I don't know what I'm doing next week or who's doing it with me, but you know, there's a piece of paper around here that says something. Have a good one. Thank you very much. Catch you on the next one, BookTube.